My name is Mark Valentine. I'd want to welcome all of you and appreciate you coming out tonight for our June 17th public information meeting on the mixed-use districts. Tonight we'll be talking about two districts in particular, but we have 4 areas in town that we are targeting overall. First, I'd like to introduce our consultant, Steve Lovett. He's from ELM. He's one of our consultants, along with Jim Sipes. He's from Sand County Studios. And in the back of the room, we have Tom Fromberger with the MRB Group. I also like to recognize many of our staff here tonight. Katie Evans is here, along with Andy Moore from the town board. I know other town board members will be coming in. Today was the Penfield Open, so our apologies for that. But again, thanks for being here. There are some handouts in the front. We do have an agenda. We do have 2 handouts showing the 2 mixed-use areas. They are double-sided sheets. I know they're small, so we do have boards up in the back. Please take a look at those. We do also have a sign-up sheet if you want to receive email information or be notified when we update things to the website. Please sign up there, and I believe they're also on the side. Well, tonight's an opportunity for us to share some information with you, for you to ask some questions, maybe just kind of sit and listen. We are going to keep this open throughout the project. So I know it's a lot to take information in, understand things being talked to, rather than just be able to ask immediate questions tonight. Please send emails. We put our contact information on the papers, our website, phone calls, whatever. We look to take information throughout. We're trying to take as much input as we can. If you have other options or other ways and methods that is better to get information to you or from us, please let us know. We're always open to new information. Just a little bit of background, and I promise I'll keep it short. We want to provide opportunity for you guys to ask questions, but a little background on how we got to mixed use. It wasn't just a concept that we thought of and said, hey, let's do mixed use. It's something that's actually been talked about for many years. We did the Route 250 corridor study back in 2005. Was started. That's looking at the corridor all the way from the south end all the way up through Webster, looking at that piece and evaluating what's there, what developed already, what is left to be developed. And looking at that study, it showed that Penfield is the most undeveloped of all those. You have the village of Fairport, you have the village of Webster, you have other development along that. Our piece is the most undeveloped, but a lot of it is for sale already, and a lot of it is up, as you can see going around, is up for sale. So we're trying to take a proactive approach, plan out the area ahead of time. We know it is going to be developed. We know there is potential for that, is to have a proactive approach going forward to plan out how that would look, what might be best in mixed use. Seems to kind of fit that bill. We also looked at it, started in 2006 with the land use analysis. Again, this was a committee that was charged with analyzing the existing land use patterns along the corridor and looking at what options there are. It again was reiterated in the comprehensive plan that was adopted on February 2nd of 2011. That plan called for 4 mixed-use areas, the one on 250, the one on Manitou Lake, which we're also talking about tonight, looking at LaSalle's Landing, and also the 4 Corners. And those are 2 districts that are existing, but we're looking at going back and looking at those once again as part of this process, and once we end this, starting that one up. So some of the things of mixed use we're looking at is creating an area that is more pedestrian friendly, is more sustainable, has less basis on the automotive and the car and the developments we've done in the past. Most of the developments we've done in the past, how many years, has been moving away from the village, moving away from the city, moving towards urban sprawl. Everybody wants the half-acre, 1-acre lots. You end up with cul-de-sac streets. You end up with more infrastructure spread out. That really isn't sustainable moving forward. Having so much spread out, the cost of the homes need to go up and up in order just to not be tax negative. To have a more sustainable plan moving forward, you need to move back towards compacting things a little bit. You can have green space and everything else, but compacting it down in and having it more sustainable, more cost effective with the utilities, more pedestrian friendly, getting a little bit away from the auto-oriented world that we've been moving towards. Very important point is when you look at the maps, we've distinctly dashed them in or bubbled them in. They're not hard and fast lines. We have not defined this is the district, these are the parcels, whatever else. This is a study. This is an area we are looking at. This is the conceptual initial thought of what we're looking at. Ultimately, it's going to be up to the town board. We formed 3 steering committees. There's 1 core committee. It's kind of the over umbrella of all the 2 groups. And we have 2 subcommittees. Subcommittees, we have one for 250s made up of residents, stakeholders in the area, business owners, people in the surrounding area that, it's going to affect residents from around the town. The Manitou Lake, likewise, is made up from residents around it, stakeholders, business owners, people that are around it. Hopefully they're out talking to the neighbors. Hopefully they're out sharing it with you. There's many of our steering committees here tonight in the audience, and again, I thank you also for coming tonight. So when you look at the maps, they are a bubble. Ultimately, it's going to be up to the town board. The steering committees are going to go through and make a recommendation to the town board at the end of this process. We're looking to end sometime fall, probably late fall, winter. Again, we've kept that open depending upon the input we get and how the process moves forward. So, I'll be turning over shortly to the consultants. I'd like to thank GTC for the funding to get this. GTC, Genesee Transportation Council, is the one that actually funded this. They're looking for different options to get away from the automotive world. So it's kind of funny to have a transportation entity supporting to look at different options and everything else, but they know that it's not sustainable moving forward. We have the DOT on our crew and everything else to help us go along and review it, but make it more compact development, get away from the auto a little bit, and minimize some of the impacts that we've seen. Excuse me. So again, sign-ups here at the front. I think as the consultants will say, please raise your hand, ask questions. We do have a microphone here if you want to come up. I do also have a handheld mic. I'll try to run around the room if you do have questions. We are videotaping this tonight. We will have it up on our website shortly so that the people at home can watch. You can follow up and watch later on if you have questions, but please reach out to us, ask us questions, send in your input later on. So thank you all for coming. With that, I'll turn it over to Jim and Steve.
Thank you. We greatly appreciate you all being here tonight. Steve and I have enjoyed every time we've come to Penfield. The weather is different every time we come up here. Even today, I got here, my plane landed like at 3 o'clock. I stepped out of the airport and it started raining like crazy. And now you look outside and it's just like perfect. So yeah, this is always a fun place to come. We want to talk to you about a couple of things. Let me give you a real quick background about us. For example, Sand County Studios, we work almost exclusively in the public realm, which means we typically work with communities, with cities, with towns, with nonprofits, with the regional commissions and that sort of thing. Steve, his firm, ELM, they do a balance of work, but they do a lot of work with private developers. So part of this project, as we're moving forward with it, we're trying to find that balance. What is best for the town of Penfield, but what also is sustainable for private developers? How do we develop an ordinance that allows the town to get everything that they want, but do it in such a way that developers not only can develop a quality product, but they can make money doing that? This whole idea is about sustainability, environmental sustainability, cultural sustainability, and economic sustainability. So anyway, that's us. I just said that, didn't I? The purpose of this project is to create a mixed-use development manual which contains design guidelines, standards, and an adoption-ready ordinance. And we're going to walk through those very quickly. Mark talked a little bit about a mixed-use district. What is it and what are we trying to do? And these are fundamental ways that we would describe a mixed-use district. It should be vibrant. It should be safe. We're promoting a full-time use of facilities. Have you ever been to a town where you get there at 7 o'clock and it looks like it's everything, what my grandfather said, they turn the lights out. There's nobody there. We're talking about creating vibrant places that are busy and active all the time. We want to create a wide variety of businesses that provide the kind of services that a community is looking for. We really are looking at a diversification of the revenue stream. It's one of the issues in Penfield is you have so much residential development, you don't have as much commercial, industrial, etc. Residential development, it doesn't generate the type of revenue that's typically needed. So you'll have to get to a point somewhere down the line where you raise taxes considerably, or you really have to reduce services. You have to find that balance.
One thing quickly I'd add, in Mark, in your preamble, one of the things that I would commend your town and your community on is taking a proactive approach to this exercise. You know, these your mic on. Is the mic on? Can you hear me? How about this for now? What I would do is really commend your staff and your town on taking a proactive approach toward this exercise. You know, there is development pressure that either exists or is going to exist in these identified mixed-use corridors. And you can either respond to it one of two ways. One way, which has been the conventional form of zoning and development that we've seen over the past 50 or 60 years as the car has been prevalent, is to just let whatever happens, happens. And we have these commercial developments which are single use with massive fields of parking and discrete uses in each one. There's no synergy between them. They're really nameless, faceless places that exist all over throughout the country. And we can see them in this region as well with these big commercial centers and shopping centers and those sorts of things that really don't create unique, special places that correspond with the qualities and values of the communities in which they're located. We've done a lot of work to try and understand Penfield and understand what makes Penfield unique and special. And really the purpose behind these districts is to take a proactive, intentional approach to planning so that you're not left with whatever is left in the least common denominator approach to how development looks in your community, but that you can find opportunities to amplify the value and all those values that Jim described: economic value, cultural value, aesthetic value.
And one thing we've heard very clearly is that there needs to be more diverse housing. In this country in general, right after World War II, we started building a lot of houses in what's called the first suburbs. So a lot of those are very similar. Well, we as a society are very different now. This is a great number. In 1950, the average household was 3.5 people. The average house size was about 900 square feet. In 2010, average household was about 2.5 people. Average house size is 2,900 square feet. So we've kind of made some shifts and changes. And what we're seeing now is there are a lot of people saying, well, I want something different. What other options do I have other than a single-family home on a half-acre residential lot? So, whoops, let me back up. So, looking at diversity, as Mark said, it's also really recognizing that for the transportation model we've used for the last 70 years, it's not working anymore. Transportation is, everything we've done in the past, as Steve said, it's based upon Euclidean zoning, which means we separate uses. So if you want to go do something, you get in your car and you drive to that other use. The idea of mixed use, it's a little bit like the old-fashioned traditional neighborhood developments where you could walk to a neighborhood store, or you could walk to a park, or you could walk to a neighbor's house and play, that sort of thing. It's very pedestrian-oriented. The idea, yes, we've been in here in the wintertime. We know not everyone's going to walk around in the wintertime. But, certainly in this type of weather, in 3 seasons out of 4 in Penfield, that kind of pedestrian connectivity is really important. It encourages people to get out, have social interaction, less dependency on the automobile. And as Steve said, it really helps create a sense of community and place, an idea that, we haven't quite moved to Penfield yet. If we keep coming back and the weather's like this, we might move in. But, there's something about Penfield. This is a very special place. We really look forward every time we come here. There's a real sense of pride. There's a real sense of character about what you have here and who you are and what's important. So we're not looking at changing Penfield. We're looking at enhancing it and adding to it and providing more options. So we're going to talk about 4 things. What is mixed use? Why are we talking about doing mixed use districts in Penfield? People always say, well, what would it look like? So we're going to talk a little bit about what it would look like. And then we're going to talk about the next steps, where we go from here. wanted to start off with this. Steve and I met a few years ago in Washington State, and we've known each other and worked together for a long time. These are two projects in Washington State, and I want to show them to you for a specific reason. This is 3rd Street Cottages. Looks like a cool place to live, isn't it? It was, and I want to tell you why this is important to look at. In Washington State, there was a real concern about affordable housing. So what they did, and you just couldn't find affordable housing. So what Washington State did is introduce a smart growth initiative. And that smart growth initiative was intended to provide more flexibility and more options, more diversity of housing type. And what it did, over on the left, that's the plan of what this looks like. So what the developer did here is they actually took 2 single-family lots, put them together, and developed 7 cottages that focus around this collective public green. And it's a very cool place to live. One of the problems actually is when they developed it, it was low-cost affordable housing. But once people moved in there, they liked it so much, other people wanted to move in, that in about 3 years, the housing prices doubled. So I'm not sure they're quite affordable housing anymore, but it shows what the kind of product that you can get if you provide flexibility and opportunities. This is very similar, Erickson Cottage Homes. Same basic idea of clustering, creating a more condensed development, putting things closer together, develop it around public open space, make it very walkable, create a sense of community where you know your neighbors. If you notice on all of these, they all have porches. I grew up on the South. In the South, if you didn't have a porch, you didn't get to know your neighbors at all. That's how you socially interacted. So this is what the plan looks like. In this case, they took 6 single-family residential homes, or lots, put them together, and created, I think there's 13 of these homes. What does that mean? It provides more homes. You can lower the price point. From a town standpoint, a community standpoint, you generate more revenue. And again, it's got a central open space. You've got all the trails, parking. People have a tendency to park, and they have a tendency to stay here a lot. Now, this is not quite the type of mixed development we're talking about for Penfield, but what's important is that the development of an ordinance allowed new types of developments to happen. And fundamentally, that's what we're trying to do in Penfield. We'll talk about why. This is the inside of it. So they're actually fairly small homes, typically 1,100 to 1,200 square feet. Again, much larger than the average home in 1950. But what they've done is they've made them taller. So they feel big. They feel very comfortable being inside of them. But the floor area ratio, the amount of square footage on the ground, is less. Doing it less means we can have more public open space. Again, the front porch, that's what you looks like when you sit at your front porch. So what is mixed use? I'm not going to read this, but it's to start off with the basic idea. It's several uses all together. It's not uses that are adjacent to each other. It's trying to find different uses that work together that create a sense of synergy. And we're going to show you some examples of that. This is what you have in Penfield right now. It's a very homogeneous landscape. It's typically, I don't know if they're all, 1/3 acre, half-acre lots, single family. But the problem with this is it takes a lot of infrastructure. You have to put a lot of infrastructure. It doesn't generate very much tax income for the community. If you want to do anything, you get in your car and you drive somewhere. So that's what you have now. And for a lot of people, that works well. For other people, they want other options and other possibilities. As an example, we as a society, we're getting older. For someone on the other side of probably the average age, I think that's a good thing. So, but you're finding that as people get older, as younger families with smaller children, they want things other than the traditional half-acre lot. And part of what we're trying to do is look at how do you provide those options and those varieties. This is where I live, left-hand corner, up the top 2 floors. This is the Smyrna Market Village in Atlanta, Georgia. And it's interesting because I actually got to help design the Smyrna Market Village, and I live there. So sometimes I think I actually yell at myself for designing something that way. It could have been better. So it's interesting living in a place that you help design gives you a really different perspective of what does it take, what works and what doesn't work. This is called vertical mixed use. The bottom floors are offices or retail spaces. The top 2 floors are residential. City of Smyrna did not have a downtown area, so they basically built one from scratch. The mixed uses here, it's commercial, it's residential, but a major part of it is civic. So the community center, the library, city hall, police station, fire station, all of those uses are integrated right here. And this is where Smyrna has all of their festivals. This is, if somebody says, are you going to go to the concert? You don't ask where. It's always at the Smyrna Market Village. So remember all the things that we talked about of what we're trying to do? All of those kinds of things are kind of mixed in here. Benefits. Again, I'm not going to read all that. We've talked about a lot of these. There are reasons that people are doing mixed-use development. It's not just the latest trend. There are some specific measurable benefits that we can do on that. One example is, if we're talking about this idea of smart growth and mixed use, I think we lost the red on that, didn't we? But anyway, for one reason, it costs less. The amount of money that we have to put into infrastructure is about 1/3 less than what it costs with traditional development. And if you stop and think about it, it makes sense. We're taking development, we're moving it closer together, we're putting all the infrastructure there, rather than what you're doing now, which is trying to take a piece of property and where you're doing half-acre lots. Smart growth development saves taxpayers at least 10% on ongoing delivery of services, whether that's repair, whether that's expansion, whatever that is. It costs less to take care of it. And one of the big things is it generates up to 10 times more tax revenue than a traditional half-acre residential would.
That's one of the things we heard at the very start when we were first introduced to the town of Penfield. I may have the numbers wrong, but wasn't it 92% or something close to that number of the tax revenues within the town of Penfield are borne by the residential tax base? And there's a strong desire to diversify that economy so that civic services, municipal services the town delivers are not all borne on the taxpayers' back, the residential taxpayers' back. So by creating these mixed-use districts, by enhancing the opportunity for good, responsible commercial development, it creates in the long term and the short term a stronger, more resilient economy for the town. That's a huge component of this project.
And this is an example of a recent economic study that we sent to Katie. Is it on the website? Okay. Call Katie. Katie will find it.
I'm happy to provide you with a copy of it.
But this is an interesting comparison. I will admit, all of my family, they're crazy about Walmart. My sisters think that's a hobby or something. But if you look at it from an impact of the amount of tax revenue per acre, this is in Raleigh, North Carolina, Walmart pays just over $2,000 per year. So you really aren't getting much tax revenue out of Walmart. Single-family residential in Raleigh, it's about $2,800 per acre. And if you compare that to the other types of development, they actually have a mall, gets about $22,000 per acre. The 6-story mixed-use district that they have now pays about $110,000 per acre. Why do they do it? There's a couple of reasons. One is, again, it's vertical. We have in this case, 6 stories of development. The units have a tendency to be smaller. They're very desirable. Trust me, we paid more to live where we live than if we lived in a traditional neighborhood development because of all the benefits and the attributes that came with that. So from a tax generation standpoint, people are doing mixed use because it economically makes sense and it helps diversify the economy. Yes, sir.
You're talking just town taxes, not city taxes, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Do you want to talk about school taxes now? Can we wait for that for just a minute? Save the discussion of school taxes is a really good one. We'll do that in a few minutes. So there are a lot of questions that we typically ask. Most people say, well, what exactly, okay, well, we get that. It's a good thing. It economically makes sense. But how do you know if it's a good mixed-use development? Steve and I probably see more mixed-use developments that really don't work than we see ones that do. The ones that do, we go through this checklist and ask these questions. And if you can address each one of these, you start to get an idea of whether it's mixed use that makes sense versus mixed use that people are doing because somebody told them that that's the next generation of things that you ought to do. And we're going to look at some specific examples of some of these. There are 8 basic principles that I think we really want to emphasize over and over again. Mixture of uses, like I said, it's not just simply doing one use and doing it better. What makes these works is having several different uses together. Oftentimes that's residential, it's some type of commercial, it could include office, it could include civic, it could include a number of other types of uses. There are a lot of different options out there. But the key is different uses where if you put them together, there's a certain synergy. For example, where I live, there's a real benefit of living where it takes you a minute to walk to the community center, where it takes you a minute to walk to the local restaurants. Unfortunately, all the restaurants know us by name, and we spend way too much money there probably. But there's a real benefit of having them, that close to us. Our studio space is actually, it takes us about 25, 30 seconds to walk there. So first time I came up here, I actually drove from Atlanta because I don't ever get to drive anymore. We walk. Everything we do happens right there. Connectivity, they've got to be connected. It's not a matter of just building them and putting them close to each other. They've got to be connected. Trails, sidewalks, other different ways that you can do that. Pedestrian access and transit. The idea is to get people out of the cars, to get them to walk, to be able to walk to a local store, for example.
The mixed use actually allows you to create additional development and not overly encumber the roadways and infrastructure with additional traffic. By having a mix of uses where people are living and able to shop and able to do other things, you're not requiring them to get in their car and burden the streets. And frankly, I think the fact that the GTC sponsored this particular study is really interesting because you've got your Transportation Council who is leading a study of mixed-use development to try and relieve the need to invest in all of this additional infrastructure that additional transportation auto trips create. So it's really a good innovative approach, and it's very important. Not only pedestrian access transit, but just getting people out of their cars, providing bicycle access, and specifically when you drill down to the town of Penfield and you look at the 2 study areas we're looking at in Manitou Lake and up here at Route 250. Route 250 in particular has there's so much context around it that has a remarkable synergy from a pedestrian, a bicycle, and creating more safe, efficient vehicular connections between neighborhoods. The YMCA is a remarkable asset. The town hall here, and when we drove up, all of the activity that's happening out there in the ball fields, and it's just a great community place. We didn't get the same sense of that when we were here in January, But when we're here now in June, it's remarkable the amount of life and activity that happens here. And it's very important as providing responsible mode of transportation and options to create synergy between these other great assets that already exist in the town.
Quick question. How many of you can walk to a grocery store? Oh, a couple. That's more than I thought. How many of you can walk to a restaurant? So, which is actually pretty good. It's more than I would have thought. But the idea of being able to, where I live, I can walk to our dry cleaner. I can walk to our lawyer's office down on the corner. I'm disappointed the ice cream shop right next door is not there anymore. Maybe that's a good thing. But there's a real benefit of being able to do those things. Neighborhood retail and services, and I think the real key there is neighborhood services. This is not the next version of a strip mall. The idea is that the services that are being provided are the services that you want in your community. It's the restaurants, it's the local market, it's the dry cleaners, it's the little things like that provide services for you. As Steve said earlier, the point of it is if we do that, you don't have to drive as far. You don't drive across town. I saw a really interesting study the other day, which actually surprised me. There's a community in Vermont, and they were developing a new. They've been debating for a long time about developing a new target. No one wants big box development. What they found, though, is they finally approved the target and they developed it. And when they did all these studies, they actually found out it actually reduced the amount of traffic flow. Do you know why it did that? Because before, people were actually driving to the target in the other town. So now they don't do that as much. Not quite what we're talking about. But the idea is if we provide services for you and not services that's attracting people from the outside, we actually wind up reducing traffic demand. Yes, sir?
What is the critical mass for a community like this? For a minimum mixed-use community?
It's a good question. It varies a lot depending upon the type of use. We've seen a lot of mixed uses that don't work, and they don't work for a couple of reasons. Some of them have a tendency to be too small. We've seen a lot of them that don't work because, and I'm going to talk about the mixed-use districts, for example, because what a district does is define the guidelines for how it works. Most of the mixed uses that we've seen, it's because the requirements for commercial are too high, i.e. we want a bunch of commercial here and a little bit of residential. Why? Because lots of commercial will generate a lot of tax dollars. That's a tough thing for us to do because, as all of you know, the economic trends change. So the key to a successful mixed use is to have the flexibility so a developer can offer a development that fits what economically makes sense, rather than us dictating to a developer, you have to do it this way, even though economically it's not viable.
There are so many variables to answer that question. So much of it, if we were in a more densely populated suburb of a larger city, you would have a totally different context and a totally different dynamic and a totally different scale of what would work and what wouldn't. I think that's one of the things that's been important, and one of the things that the staff and the steering committee has been great in helping us really grounded in the town, grounded in the locations in which we're working. We'll talk specifically a little bit later about Manitou Lake. That's a mixed-use district, identified as a mixed-use district. It is not at all a prototype mixed-use district. It's really a destination. That's what's been determined as we've all gone through and studied it. Nevertheless, the desire is there to, and really the merit is there, to look at it as a mixed-use destination that creates synergy both in the uses that occur on the site and the uses of what that recreational asset can be for Manitou Lake, for Ellison Park, for the other context that's around it. So there's really not, you really can't say that there's a tipping point to create the kind of vibrant synergy, because we're working with two very different districts here in this study, and we're working in a unique in a unique context, the town of Penfield is a unique and special place.
What is key, though, is, and let me give you a very specific example, like the little ice cream shop. Why did it go under? Because the owner was not very nice. I'm sorry. She just was not. She growled at everybody. Good ice cream, though.
Ice cream
But-
Nazi?
What's that?
Sorry.
Yeah. She didn't like her job very much. We always said we should have just bought that and forget the design stuff. That would have been more lucrative maybe. But what would not have worked is if we would have specified in the design guidelines that it had to be a minimum square footage that was too big. Ice cream shops don't have to be very big in order to be successful. So part of it is when we do that, we need to have a range of options for what an ice cream shop could be so that whoever's going to decide to do that says, yeah, this is how much money I have to pay per month in rent. I can make that work, rather than have them being required to use twice the amount of space when economically it may not work. But everything shifts and changes. Every project is a little bit different. Yes, sir.
I realize that there are probably a lot of people here are interested in 250. I think, the Manitou Lake is such a unique, I'd just like to ask a quick question. I have another meeting to go to, but, and I was at your, I think, March meeting here, sat around and listened to both. I'm just curious, when I do planning, I kind of go into the area and I kind of try to get a feel for it. I just was curious, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but how many minutes or how many hours did you spend at Manitou Lake? I'm just curious, both of you guys.
It's a good question. I will say this, we're big believers of the same thing. In order to design and plan a site properly, you have to spend time there. We've not spent a whole lot of time at Manitou, for example. I think we've probably been out there maybe a total of 5 hours, 6 hours, something like that.
Yeah.
The last time
It was-
it got snowed out.
Well,
It was-
we were disadvantaged starting this project in January because Manitou Lake is not an easy site to get to.
Exactly.
So, yeah, we've spent a bit of time out there. We've walked around. We've seen it from a number of different perspectives. But we need to spend more time out there.
I will say this, one of the things that we're doing is a little bit different. We're not doing a master plan. So I will say this, we could not do a master plan there with the level of knowledge that we have.
That's right.
With the level of knowledge we have, we can identify buildable opportunities and then define what makes sense there. And when I say what makes sense, it's how tall is it, how dense is it, how much parking can we get there, how far do we need to be away from the water, what level of access. So I think we're pretty comfortable with being able to say, this is what makes sense, and this is what's going to make a development at Manitou successful.
Thanks.
It's a good question, though. And yeah, now that the weather's nice, we'll go spend more time out there. Let me back up. Two things very quickly. The last two, I think those are very important. Healthy living is a big part of this. I mean, part of that is getting people to, to walk, to socialize, to be able to do things that don't involve an automobile. There's a lot of other things. These types of mixed-use developments strongly promote farmers markets, community gardens, any type of activity like that. They typically connect to trails, to public green space, that sort of thing. So healthy living is the next generation of this type of planning. Consideration for existing residents, that's huge. Mixed-use developments are required to take into account the type of development that's there now. So Mark, for example, mentioned 4 mixed-use districts within the town of Penfield. They're all different. The requirements for each one are different. The people around it, the land use around it is different. So it's a combination, as Steve said, of understanding what is unique about each one of those areas and then defining guidelines that do 2 things. One, that respects that, and then at the other side of it it creates nice, healthy buffers to make sure that as we do mixed-use development, there's a separation, a physical separation between uses, but there's still a connectivity via trails, walkways, that sort of thing. This is Ivy Walk. This is actually right down the street. It's another project that we worked on. And I wanted to show you a couple of projects. Put an asterisk on all of these. We're not suggesting that all of these work for Penfield. I mean, we know this is, what is that, 4 stories, 5 stories? But what's interesting is again, the concept, the bottom level is commercial. The top 4 levels are residential. So that ratio of commercial to residential is very different than from where I live. This works in some places, and other places it does not. For example, this would not work at 250. Why? It's too dense. The scale is wrong. It's not consistent with the land uses that are there. So in a more urban setting, in a more urban context, something like this could be very effective. Another photo of Ivy Walk. So even though it's 5 stories, though, and it's a much different scale, a lot of the things that we talked about, this pedestrian scale, these outdoor gathering areas of places where you can eat, pedestrian-oriented, all of those things are still there. Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta, Georgia. So come to Atlanta. I'll give everybody a tour. Sir.
Question, a lot of these infill projects, or are a lot of these infill projects, or are they in undeveloped areas where, like 250, which I consider partially undeveloped out there, where you basically have to have a car to get there?
You see a real combination of both. Steve and I were actually talking today. Projects like, for example, where I live, Smyrna Market Village, that was a greenfield development. There wasn't anything there.
Nothing there.
Ivy Walk was fundamentally a greenfield development, but it's much closer to downtown Atlanta. It's an area that kind of made sense for a more dense development. You're going to find, and I don't know how many examples we have here, but you're going to find that the projects that are more dense, the more dense they are, the more likely they are infill developments or right on the periphery of a major urban development. So you'll see a mix, and we're going to show you some examples in a minute that some very cool mixed-use development where the primary focus was land conservation. So you can define different objectives for what you're trying to do.
Thank you.
Are these one-way streets or two-way streets, or just
Well, it depends. I mean, this right here, this is Sawgrass Village. This is a project that actually is under construction right now that we've been involved with. It's in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida. It's right at the front door of the PGA Tour's offices. It's an interesting project because it is a redevelopment project in this particular case. It's a site that was built in the early 1980s when everything was purely car-driven. It was very non-pedestrian. Even within this small little shopping center, to go from one place to another, you had to get in your car. And in fact, it was so hard to find your way around. There was a CVS pharmacy that was part of Sawgrass Village that was tucked in amongst the existing buildings, and we are relocating it. Actually, the new CVS is under construction right now as part of a walkable Main Street. And we were there waiting for the CVS land representative, and they had to call us to get directions to how to find their store because it was so poorly laid out. They couldn't, I mean, the residents sort of knew where it was, but they would go to a supermarket, get in their car, go to CVS, get in their car, go to a restaurant, get in their car, go to the dry cleaners, get in their car to go home. And it was absolutely auto-centric. So what we've done with this project is basically turned it inside out, created a really pedestrian-rich environment, a mixed-use environment. This illustration doesn't illustrate exactly that the residential intensity is much higher in this than it ended up. And that was a result of a lot of community input and community meetings. So this project is a mixed-use project with some hotel, retail, and office principally in a residential context, and civic space. That's an important component to this project as well. So one of the things Jim said, most of our work is in the private sector. Ponte Vedra Beach has an overlay district. So we, not only in cases like this, develop design guidelines, help inform design guidelines, but we also are responsible for putting design guidelines in use in actual projects. So we can tell you probably all the things that really have needed to be unwound with the design criteria that they have that we've had to apply, which is, I think, very helpful.
I was going to say, the other projects that we showed at, both, they have two-way streets. And it varies. You find some of them that have one-way streets. I mean, you'll find some. And, for example, we back up just very quickly. Wow, I backed up a lot. There's actually a median right down the middle. You can't tell, but at the end of that street, this is Main Street in Smyrna. At the end of that street is City Hall. Right behind us is kind of the major thoroughfare through the city, and there's a fountain right here. So there's a divided median. So it's one way, one lane going that way with parking, one lane coming back this way, and then there's kind of a turnaround. So in this case, you have one lane in, one lane out, divided by a median. There are a number of, they call them traffic calming measures that you can do. It's intended to slow down traffic. I find it interesting because when my mother thinks the most fun thing to do in the world is to come to our house and sit on the deck and watch everybody. But what's funny is it's such a pedestrian-oriented place. They actually have this street closed off right now, but most of the time it doesn't matter. People walk in the street because it feels so pedestrian-friendly that the cars have to honk their horn or something to get them to move.
This project, if there's ever a project that gives merit to what a mixed-use development is, it's this one. This is a project called Deerwood Commons. It's also known as Tattersall. It's in Jacksonville, Florida, and we were the master planners for this project. And when we looked at it, this is a greenfield in the path of progress kind of location, not in a sense unlike 250, where there was development pressure here. And the landowner basically said, we can do this one of two ways. We can basically subdivide this in a series of parcels, which has been the traditional form of conventional development, where there's an apartment parcel here, and it's a garden apartment, fine. Next door to it might be a shopping center, might be some retail or strip shopping center, fine. Next to it might be some other use, fine. But none of them work together, none of them speak to each other, but it's a very easy way to develop. Instead, they said, we want to intentionally integrate these and create something that has additional value. So what we did is created a master plan for this property, which integrated, and the other standalone parcel would have been a hotel parcel. So what we did is we integrated these into a mixed use where all of the uses that would have been in that strip commercial shopping center are now downstairs on the lower level. The garden apartments that would have just been ordinary, nondescript apartments are now really unique residences on the second floor, integrated with the uses that are on the ground floor. And anchoring the end of the street, and you can just maybe barely catch it at the end of the street, is Hotel Indigo, which is a marvelous hotel that anchors this area. What they've been able to do is they've been able to attract one of the finest restaurants in the city into this location because it's a cool space. It's pedestrian friendly. It feels better. They're able to attract residences at a higher lease rate, higher apartment rents, higher occupancy because they're better, because they're integrated in a place that's special. And that's the kind of thing that's so important in these mixed-use districts, is to put the synergies together. So rather than conventional development, you would have all of the same uses with all of the same intensities, but the value would not be the same as it is if they're put together in a way that creates more synergy. And if we keep going through the slides, this is another project called Bartram Walk that we were involved in. This was originally conceived to be an Albertsons with a couple of shopping little stores adjacent to it. And instead, it's become a series of smaller shops. Again, this was a concept sketch, and I think if you go forward, that's actually it constructed and finished. And it's become really the heart of this community. This is a very suburban location, and there were really no services, a deficit of services, very much like 250 in the path of progress. And by developing what's primarily commercial with a little bit of office on the second floor that creates some synergy. There are a couple of banks in this location as well. The integration of these uses, and even though they're different buildings as you go across, in some cases built and developed by different developers, the framework of this mixed-use district allowed the pedestrian connections to match up, the vehicular connections to match up, so there was consistency as you moved between different parcels, and you wouldn't know one was developed by one group and one was developed by somebody else. There's consistency in how it's executed, and that's, I think, very important in the study areas that we're looking at. And then Cornhill is obviously, that's, I think, an interesting example here locally of...
How many of you been to Cornhill? Very good.
And you know, obviously, what a great location, right on the river, close to downtown, and obviously they've attracted some fine restaurants and some fine residential. There are challenges associated with that we've seen, and we've heard anecdotally that that there have been restaurants that have had some turnover there. There are fundamentals that have to, you know, human nature exists, and as much as we try and create a perfect mixed-use district that gets rid of the car, we have to accommodate the car, and we have to accommodate parking. And it was our observation that there's not a lot of parking immediately available at Cornhill, and when people go to restaurants, when people shop, it really is human nature prevails, and if you can't find a parking spot and it's not clear how to get where you want to go and how to park and how to get there, that we've heard that may be some of the challenges that Cornhill has had, but in many respects, it is a well done mixed-use residential and commercial zone.
It goes back to your question earlier about, you know, what is that kind of critical mass that you need. You know, the restaurants that are failing there probably are not because they're not good restaurants, is there's no place to park. So in that case, we've seen mixed-use districts that, for example, do not allow valet parking. I'm not sure why. That's what they decided to do. This is one of the places where you almost need to require valet parking because there's not sufficient amount of parking for it to work otherwise. So if you have, and I will say this, our general rule on mixed use is there are no drive-in windows. Again, the point is not to be able to sit in your car and do more. The point is to park your car and get out and do more. So there are a number of types of uses that work well, others that don't work quite so well, and there are a lot of design and planning solutions that can help a lot.
Cornhill also, as you can see from the picture on top, you know, there's a great civic component to Cornhill, which is that the corridor right along the river and that pedestrian and bikeway. I think that's relevant to the discussion of Manitou Lake. Manitou Lake, that public edge ought to be accessible to the public. That's one of the things the steering committee has told us, and it's one of the observations that we've made, is that's a great asset to the town. And so just as Cornhill obviously has a component of that that's accessible to the public, that gives the public the access to the river, that's certainly an important component to Manitou.
Some other examples, and these are actually, and we talked about the two different projects, 250 and at Manitou. 250 lends itself more to a traditional mixed-use development, and these are just some examples of that. This is using a concept called complete streets, one-way traffic. The streets on either side are, alternate the other way, but they typically have on-street parking. They're actually fairly tight in order to slow down traffic. Wide sidewalks, outdoor cafes, commercial restaurant activity at the bottom floor, residential up on top. Again, example of vertical mixed use.
In that situation, are you putting parking lots in the back, just
There-
employee parking and things like that? Too much insufficient parking space?
But the key is the parking lots that you do, you try to keep them fairly small. You put parking along the perimeter of it, not not big parking lots in the middle. One of the things that you'll notice, what's cool about it, is there's a facade. Going back to, we were reading all your comments again today, Katie, about the fact that each building is a little bit different and there's a continuous facade. If you took that out and put in a big parking lot, it changes the whole scale of that space. So you provide parking along, some of them have interior parking. You'll find, whoever to ask about the density of it, you'll find actually a lot of these have underground parking. They'll have parking on the inside of the building for residences. And then all the other parking, those are for paid customers. So,
You're asking a good question, because we were confronted with the same issue at Bartram Walk, where, you have certain parking requirements that you have to maintain. Now, one of the good things about mixing office and restaurant uses, for example, is the peak use occurs at different times. So in a lot of cases, when you're dealing in a mixed-use environment, you're able to realize reductions in what the required parking counts are. That's one of the benefits of mixed use and one of the synergies that you can create. One of the other things you can do, you need to have parking in front, but it doesn't need to be the massive parking field like you see at most supermarkets and other places. If you provide sufficient parking up front for the day-to-day convenience user, and then you can have larger parking fields to the side or in the rear with clearly marked access to get to the front, to the storefront, to that pedestrian area. All of that has to be designed with the pedestrian in mind. So it's you can't just not have parking in front and expect it to be successful. You have to find a balance. But for it to be successful, it won't feel like a good environment if it's just a massive sea of parking in front of the buildings as you would see conventionally.
the number you typically hear is that mixed use requires 25 to 30% less parking than it normally would if you have the separate uses. So, I mean, one of the things that we've seen is it greatly reduces the amount of asphalt and paving that you have for these. A typical cross-section of what we're trying to accomplish. Pedestrian scale, again, on-street parking, it's a good way to slow down traffic, reduces scale. Street lighting, wayfinding, signage, overhead canopies, trying to create that pedestrian scale. This is Bainbridge Island in Washington. Another place I used to live in a lot of these places. My mother always swore the gypsies dropped me off or something. But what's cool about Bainbridge Island is from here, this whole thing is very walkable because the ferry that connects to downtown Seattle is just kind of right down the hill. So what people do, tourists, basically they'll get on the ferry, they'll ride over, and then this whole area is a very walkable area. So all of the bottom shops, again, commercial oriented, residential up on top. You cannot buy one of those residential units. If one of them comes up for sale, you have to walk by and see them put the sign up at the same time. They're always in demand. And it's a cool place to hang out. Again, all the pedestrian things, the crosswalks, the landscaping, the narrow roads. I mean, all of it is intended to really enhance that pedestrian scale.
I've got a question regarding logistics.
You bet.
Deliveries, garbage pickup. In our neighborhood, snow removal.
Yep.
Those narrow roads are all fine and well in some of the southern states, but how do you guys address something like that here?
Well, good question. There's actually, let me do them one at a time, because I live in an urban village, so I know all about all the deliveries of all the restaurants and the shops and things. And at times there's certain inconveniences. But when we designed it, we specifically designed places to be wider. And those are places that clearly say no parking allowed. They're big enough for delivery trucks to back up, and they can pull out in 3 different directions. So delivery absolutely is a key part of that. Your question earlier about the scale of the ones that don't work, if you don't take into account deliveries and maintenance and those types of issues, then it's going to fail. So that's fairly easy for us to design that. Part of it, as you'll find in some of these mixed uses, they have very controlled times of when deliveries can occur. So during peak times, like for example where I live, it's kind of a free-for-all. They let deliveries occur anytime that they want. Ivy Walk, which is denser and busier, Ivy Walk you can deliver in the morning up till 11 o'clock. You have in an afternoon from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock. That's it. You miss those delivery times, then you don't get anything. There's a number of projects in here in a number of states where snow removal, is an issue. On those, typically what we do is we actually look at the kind of public spaces, where we can have additional space to allow for snow to pile up. For example, they obviously didn't intend it in Georgia, but the median that we have at the Smyrna Market Village, that's actually a pretty good place to pile the snow up in the middle and let it occur there. In a northern city, we've done a lot of work in Colorado, and in Colorado, we do a couple of things. We have turning lanes in the middle, or medians, where we do that. We specifically design small urban parks, plaza areas, that in the winter, we basically fill those with snow. But you're right, those are issues you have to address. Otherwise, up here, it's going to get snowed in and you can't get to your front door, and come spring, there's going to be a whole lot of for sale signs probably. Our guidelines address those as broad issues. It would be up to individual developers working with town staff and town board to come up with the specific examples of how best to do that.
Yeah, a pedestrian-friendly place and the ability to deal with snow storage aren't mutually exclusive issues, and they're integrated solutions, but both are very important.
You're finding right now, for example, one of the biggest areas where mixed-use developments occur is in Colorado. Why? The land is very valuable. Building mixed uses vertically makes a lot of sense. Taking parking and putting parking internally. So we're seeing a lot of that. This is Market Common in Myrtle Beach. Again, very traditional mixed-use development. And this case, you actually have a mixture of commercial retail, you have office space, and you have some residential, but it's primarily the first two with less residential.
I assure you there won't be stucco like that here.
No. Blue Black Square. This is somewhere around Maryland. I don't remember exactly where, but again, this is a fairly traditional development. You try to take what happens at intersections, you build density there. One of the ideas behind mixed use is you have some areas where you want to concentrate density in order to do that, because again, we can put more units there, we can reduce infrastructure costs, and we can help protect and preserve open space around that. Use that you can protect agricultural space, you can use it for public open space, a number of things. We could talk about housing. We talked earlier about diversity of housing. This is one example where, again, this is all residential, but the idea is to really look at this kind of compact development. And this is a good example. I don't think I have a laser, but can you see where the little nodes are, where the development's occurring? That's where all of the residential development is. All of the rest of that is public open space. It's woods. I grew up on a 500-acre farm. There's no place better to grow up than a farm with apple orchards and ponds and grapevines and that sort of stuff. So the point of that is we're going to make lots smaller. We're going to put them closer together, and we're going to take all the land that was in those half-acre lots, and we're now going to make it part of public open space. Again, it's a more cost-effective approach to development. This is a good example. This is Conover Commons, also in Washington State. But you can see, this is actually showing two things. Remember the other cottages we showed? Very similar idea. You've got the 12 cottages, all focused around a common courtyard. And it's condensed, it's compact. And then you have this giant buffer area around it. It does two things. It protects the existing natural resources. And there's actually single-family development over on this side. So by compacting that, we're able to protect the resources and use that to create a buffer between the two different uses. But again, still sidewalks, still trails, the connectivity, an example of what that looks like.
What would be the walking distance?
And
From like a parking lot to somebody's residence?
Oh,
In that type of situation,
whoops, sorry.
roughly.
Well, I'll say this. You actually see a wide variety. As Steve said, we still are an automobile-oriented society. Most mixed uses that we see, people still want to park in front of their front door. Even go a step further than that, most of them want their own garage. So you'll still see that more often than you don't. In this case, what's the scale on? Do you have a scale? A couple hundred feet. So to go from parking lot, the width, the length of each parking lot is about 20 feet. So if we go from this parking lot up to C5 is maybe, I don't know, 200 feet. So some people will do that, some people won't. In this particular, in this case in Washington State, the climates, we both spend a lot of time in Washington climates. Winters can get they're cold, they're gray, they're not very much fun, but they don't have a lot of snow. So the big advantage there. So, but like I said earlier, we still see most developments where parking is part of a unit, not separate like you see here.
Is that considered cluster development?
Yes. Cluster development is the idea you put development closer together in order to protect open space around that. Yeah. There's a concept called smart growth, and smart growth really pushes the idea of cluster development for a number of reasons. It goes against the traditional half-acre types of lots that you see. Like I said earlier, it costs less. One of the things you can do with cluster development is I can make houses a little bit smaller. I can put more in there. I can lower the price point on those and still make more money because I have more units that way than I would before. This is in Puyallup. You know you're from Washington if you can say Puyallup. But again, same basic idea. And again, these are really popular. You can't find these anymore. The problem is that when you develop them within 2 to 3 years, they've increased 50 to 70% in value. So you're seeing a lot of developers doing this. And what's nice about them, we talked about the idea of scale. You can do these types of developments in very small areas. It by itself is not mixed use, but it's a type of use that provides a level of diversity. As we said earlier, there's 2 types of mixed use: vertical, which is commercial on top, residential, or commercial on bottom, residential on top. The other type of mixed use is putting uses next to each other. And so these types of cottage developments are a way to provide smaller, more diverse homes that are now part of a larger mixture. Sycamore green mixed use, again, a different approach. These are all townhomes. They put up to 8 units together, back to back to back. Your question, and this is the front. In the back, there's an alleyway. Every single one of them has its own garage. This is John Marvel in Missouri. It's single. It's older adult family, but again, it's part of. How many of you have been to the John Marvel? It's massive. It's probably, I don't know, 500-600 acres, and they have about every kind of housing type that you can think of, but it's all oriented toward older adults. Some of them like the idea of living closer. Some of them want single family. Some of them want more of a group shared home.
That's one of the things the steering committee has been really insightful to us. And talking about Penfield, as the population ages, where does the older population go next to stay in Penfield? A lot of more compact residential neighborhoods, residential options can exist in a mixed-use kind of context. At the same time, where do the young people come to Penfield that's cool, that competes with the other places that are in the region? Those are important people to attract, important jobs to attract, and important population to attract. they're drawn to the desirability of the mixed-use walkable areas. And so both are opportunities to diversify the residential offerings, just in the same way it's important to diversify and strengthen the commercial development here as well.
A couple of real quick notes about this based on some of your all's questions. Parking is is in the back. If you notice, there are 4 units. Remember the one we saw, there were 8. There's only 4 units here. They found that with older adults, they like the idea of kind of that smaller scale. Plus, to walk from one end to your end unit, the person on the end unit, it was pretty short. You'll also notice there are no steps. So part of the idea for older adults and young children, for those of us who've gone through that phase, you try to get rid of steps. You try to simplify it, do it all on one level.
Do you guys integrate any mini storage in any of these units?
Some do. For example, where I live, they actually have individual storage units. We've seen some, in some places, they'll actually put the residential, the mixed-use development, and then they will do additional parking. You actually can buy extra parking. That parking comes with additional storage, and that sort of thing. You don't see it a lot, I don't think, because I think a large part of this is the idea of downsizing. Remember when I moved from Washington State to Atlanta, everything that fit in my BMW came with me. I sometimes think I should turn around and go back and do that again and simplify life a little bit. But these in general don't have a massive amount of storage. I think that's thought. I don't know if you've seen.
Mini storage, I'll say mini storage as a discrete land use within a mixed-use district probably isn't appropriate, just by virtue of what it is and how it's used. There's really not a great synergy that hits on all of these other important points of mixed use, of pedestrian activity, of ground level street life, of civic engagement. I don't see that as being appropriate. But in the design of these units, in the design of multifamily residential, people have stuff. And so a lot of times we'll have, when we design one of these, we'll have lockers or some kind of auxiliary storage that's baked into the design of the building.
Why couldn't you guys integrate mini storage and make it look like one of the buildings? Because I would imagine there's a lot of people that have stuff that they don't want to get rid of. I would think that it would be
you certainly could. I think
it's thinking outside the box. What you guys are doing, right?
Yeah.
Thinking outside the box.
Well, see, and I think that's a really good question. Part of it is when we develop the mixed-use guidelines, I don't think there's anything in the guidelines that say you can't do that. I think what the guidelines would probably say, which is what Steve said, is you can't do it as a separate, independent thing.
Right, you'd have
Now,
to blend it in with the rest.
sure, and at that point, like, for example, where I live, you couldn't see it, but in the back there's a 2-car garage. And when I pull in, there's a spot over to the right that when I looked at it, I thought, well, wow, there's all kinds of extra space there. So I actually built shelves in there that I don't think I'll ever fill up. So in that case, I think it was probably more accidental because of how the steps came down and the garage was laid out. But in essence, it's doing what you're talking about. It's providing that kind of, it's providing an additional amenity that some people would want.
I guess to clarify, Mike, is actually being mixed use, you're going to have commercial. I'm wondering if they have mixed mini storage in that standalone, not standalone, but you know what I'm saying? Where let's say I have an exact sports car and I want to keep it in there in the wintertime, and I don't want to put it in my single bay garage.
You could leave it in my house.
I'd leave it at your house. That's good.
I think in general, you'll find that when we'll talk about what are permissible uses, what are non-permissible uses, and what are conditional uses. I would say this. I would say in general that would be a non-permissible use. And I'll give you examples of other ones. Automobile repair stuff. I mean, again, it's not consistent with what we're trying to do, which create a sense of synergy. As a general rule, you'll find most mixed-use districts, most mixed-use developments, don't have drive-in windows. Why? Because a drive-in windows does everything the opposite of what you're trying to do. I want people to park my car go into this shop, get something, go over here, eat lunch, and then go eat ice cream next door, and then come back, not get in your car and do 2 or 3 or 4 different trips. So there are certain types of uses. In general, we will say that they're not permissible. There's flexibility in all of those, which says you come up with something creative. The town has the ability to look at that and say, yeah, that works. That meets the objective of what we're trying to do.
In terms of infrastructure capacity, is there interest in, or talk about, like in Victor, they have that fiber optic network of bringing something in this area for business, certain high-tech industries, or small professional buildings that might use it, or research facilities?
That's probably a town of Penfield staff question, but I will say this. Within mixed-use districts, one of the options that the town has, which is to provide incentives. Some places they do that, they choose to do that. In some places, a town or community won't. Give you an example, in Kansas City, I don't know if you noticed, the Google picked 5, let me back up, I'll say it the way Kansas City does. Google picked communities where they were going to put this super high speed, broadband infrastructure, and they selected a community right on the outskirts of Kansas City. And so they've built that there, and one of the things that's happened is a lot of entrepreneurs who want that kind of technological ability have moved in there. So you do see places where that occurs. I think as a general rule, we don't see a lot of that just because that's a lot of infrastructure to put in. The town would have to evaluate, if we provide these kind of incentives, what do we get out of it? Is it going to be worth doing that? There are a lot of potential incentives that you can do. This is another example. And something like this would probably be appropriate at 250. Again, it's kind of this cluster housing. There's actually 4 different units that are that are right next to each other. They are not attached. They actually have a small gap in between those. But they're all developed right there. A lot of public open space, like Steve talked about at Cornhill. You've got a sidewalk. The sidewalk provides connectivity throughout the entire community. One of the things that I'll save the open space discussion. This is a universally accessible home. So it's like what we talked about before. The idea is there are no steps. So you can come into it if you're in a wheelchair, my mother, every time she comes to our house, she walks to the top and says, still 23 steps. So she would be okay if there were not 23 steps. So, the idea of developing something like that is that house is flexible for everyone. Any of us can move in there and live with it. You have smaller children? Perfect. You have older adults who are living there? Perfect. But for the rest of us, it works just as well. One of the things that you're going to see over and over on these types of developments is this idea, you'd mentioned the clustering, of creating these kind of dense areas that you have these dense cores, and as you move away from that, it becomes less dense. And then surrounding those is you have green space, and you have trails, and you have connectivity. And that does a number of things. It helps protect resources. It helps minimize the visual impact of the development, and serves as great buffers for adjacent uses. This is an example of a project we did in North Georgia. And again, the red area in the middle, it's the most dense area. Then you can see as you get outside of that, so that red area is kind of like the town center. But you'll also notice right next to that, and I'll show you in a minute, right next to the town center, we actually have this public open space. So this is right on the very edge. In this case, the public open space is primarily a park with a body of water there. A lot of different ways you can do that. This is High Point community. Steve knows more about High Point than I do.
The one thing I'd say about High Point, it was a project that the Seattle Housing Authority developed, and it's one of the few examples of subsidized housing that has actually increased the value of market rate housing around it by virtue of how well it was done. A lot of the things that Jim has talked about before, the integration of open space, the organization of the housing, and the emphasis and focus on pedestrian connectivity and the quality of the exterior space is really exceptional at High Point. So if you look at it, it is a subsidized housing project, and we're not certainly suggesting a subsidized housing project here in Penfield for this, but just to give you an example of how different housing types that may not exist today can actually amplify the value of what's around us by virtue of how well they're done. So, Jim, we need to move more quickly.
So, yeah, very quickly, this is a mixture of that affordable housing and traditional housing, and one of the things that's cool about it is how that infrastructure lays out. It's all that connectivity that we're talking about. And it does a great job of really addressing stormwater management. A community garden is part of that gathering space. Other examples that we talked about earlier, the housing, the public open space, the connectivity, very traditional town green, town center. The idea of clustering the green areas around that to help reduce cost. And you'll see a lot of examples of that. It's a very green, very appropriate approach to doing that. And we strongly believe that, and this is a good example where you have clustered housing, you have public open space, and you have trails, connectivity that all fit together. It's all part of that integrated approach. So we're going to talk very quickly about Manitou Lake and Route 250. As Mark said earlier, these have all been studied. So if you look closer at the comp plan, it talks about these a little bit more detail. We mentioned earlier about the fact that you have this kind of homogeneous residential development within Penfield, and the comp plan has talked about this idea of having different uses, and mixed use is identified as one of your future land uses. And these are the four that Mark talked about. We talked about the different steering committee, and what we're doing right now is we're developing a draft manual of this. We will be working with the town staff to go through that in an incredible level of detail. And once we do that, then we will get back with the steering committee. I will say this, the steering committee has done an outstanding job of representing the town of Penfield, of making sure that we remember. So we can show you all the examples from all over the country. They continuously remind us, this is Penfield. Make sure this works for Penfield. This is Manitou Lake. As Steve said, it's a very unique setting with the lake, with the steep topography around it. A lot of environmental constraints that are major issues that need to be addressed. But it's not a traditional mixed-use development, but it provides some very unusual opportunities for mixed-use development. 250, as we said earlier, it's much more of a typical type of opportunity for mixed use. What's really important, it's not an option of, well, let's just leave it all the way it is. It doesn't quite work that way. It's prime developable land. So it's going to be developed. The question is, how is it going to be developed? And what does the town of Penfield want it to look like? So with that, we talked a lot, but you all added to it a little bit there, those two. So what we're doing on the next steps on this, as I said earlier, we are putting together a draft manual. We're going to be working with town staff. We're going to be working with the steering committee to make specific recommendations on what mixed-use districts need to look like for these two specific areas. So at our next public meeting when we come back, we're going to talk about much more specific details, such as building heights and amount of open space, and do we have many storage units or do we not, and how many trails and connectivity, and how many of you live close to one of the two districts? So we'll probably talk about buffers and how do we make sure that any development occurs there what potential impact it's going to have upon adjacent land. We're going to talk very specifically about recommendations on parking. How much parking do we think each one is going to take? Specific details about traffic calming, how we handle all of that. So that's for us the next step. But at this point, we're going to stop and address any of the other questions you have. Yes, sir.
I'm just curious, the gun club's right there.
Yes.
What are you, management-wise and addressing that issue? And it's a fine club, and it's not going to go anywhere, and that's fine. It's a good resource, but it's unique to that corridor.
One of the guidelines is children cannot wear outfits that look like ducks. No, it's a good point. What's interesting is they both have gun clubs next to them. And that was one of our first questions for the staff is, so do you all pick mixed uses only close to gun clubs, or does it just work out that way? It provides some issues that need to be addressed. There are certain types of uses where it really doesn't make a lot of difference. There are other types of uses it would be a problem because of the noise for that. So the guidelines that we're talking about, I'll tell you right now, it's not in our position to make suggestions on changing adjacent development or anything. Yeah.
I'm just curious, how do you address that or think about that?
You understand what the problems are. You understand when they operate. You understand what the potential conflicts are. And again, they're different because, for example, for both of them, you probably don't really see the gun club. It's the noise that it makes. As I said earlier, there are certain types of uses that probably don't make a whole lot of difference on that. There are other types of uses, and we've talked about a lot of those. Yes, sir.
What types of uses are you talking about? I'm sorry, I don't need that.
I'll give you an example. At Manitou, one of the uses that people have talked about is kind of a spa, a day spa kind of thing. I don't know a lot about day spas.
A destination spa, almost a destination spa, right. Resort spa. It's an exceptional. Manitou Lake is exceptionally beautiful, as you know.
It can definitely work as a destination point.
But the idea of a tranquil spa-like environment next to the activity of a gun club is not necessarily consistent. So that's one of the uses.
I was asking the other side of the question.
Yeah.
What example would fit there?
I'll give you an example. For example, in a lot of the residential development, the gun club actually stops shooting before you get into night. So for small families, that might be a problem, but for younger singles, etc., that may not be really much of an issue. So if you look at that, they're not a real benefit. Is the gun club is not operating at nighttime when people are sleeping. If they were, that becomes much more of a problem, and you'd start to say, well, at that point, maybe overnight residential or hotel or something like that doesn't work.
But there are recreational uses that are appropriate. There are commercial uses that are appropriate. There are a lot of uses that are appropriate, and it's a special piece of property.
I could just add to that, recognizing that not everybody has the opportunity to live next to a gun club or participate in membership to a gun club. The town of Penfield asked for representatives from both clubs to join our subcommittees for the reason that we could be informed, understand what complexities go into operating such a facility, so we can make informed, educated decisions.
That's a good point. Part of it is understanding, and I'll say this, not just the gun club, but all adjacent uses. How do they work? At 250, how does the YMCA work? What activities occur there that's potentially compatible with mixed use versus what's not? Any other questions?
Density development there within the bubble. What sewer capabilities are available
helps the landowner?
Very good question. For 250, there are issues, there are limitations with sewer capacity. We've actually done two things. What we've done is we've looked at mixed-use development that could occur there and how it could occur. That broader question doesn't specifically address what the demand would be for existing sewer capacity. And let me explain why. Part of it is, as as developers who've looked at that site, there are a lot of other, there are different alternatives that they could do. There are other potential solutions other than using existing sewer capacity. So it comes into play. It is a concern in part because of overall density and overall units, but we're not making long-term planning decisions about any of the mixed-use districts based upon current limitation right now. So does that make, Steve, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Doesn't? Well, let me do it this way. You have existing limitations on sewer right now. That has a specific impact on how many units. I'll tell you one thing we've talked about. What you don't want to do is say, okay, well, let's do a mixed-use development. Let's use all of your sewer capacity and use it right there, which means there's no other development. I don't think that would be an acceptable solution. But saying that, we're not going to right now say within the mixed district, well, therefore you can only do this. You can only use a certain percentage of it. The guidelines will clearly say that's a major issue that has to be addressed with the town as you move forward. And if a developer wants higher density there, they have to address that issue. It will be up to the developer to address that. Now, it could be, a lot of different options. One option would be to tap into sewer lines, other than what's in that area right there. There might be advances. I have to admit, I'm not not up to the newer approaches with sewage.
I can maybe talk to that also.
Yeah.
There are 3 different sewer basins that we're looking at in that area. We've done a sewer study of the area. There's a sewer basin that goes to the Edenfield Wayland Meadows area. There's a sewer basin that goes behind the YMCA. There's also a sewer basin that goes over to Mallory Lane. So there's 3 different basins that we can work off in that area. Yes, there are limitations. That's something that they're going to generate a generic ordinance. The town of Penfield, working with the sewer department, the engineering department, planning department, will have to work with allocating how those sewer units are dispersed and making sure that the mixed-use development doesn't take sewer units from residences that are already there. Obviously, part of the development may be bringing a line up or whatever in that may, garner some extra units for the development, but it may bring a main in that would then feed, existing residents that are there. But that's something that the consultants are not going to allocate out the units. That'll be something that the town itself will go through and allocate based on the size of the parcel, type of building, and everything else.
So then, if I'm understanding you right, all parcels within this will have availability to sewer when they want to develop. The first developer in there is not going to take all the capacity and a quarter of that land, and then everybody
We'll
else
have to
is worthless land.
True. We'll have to allocate that out. So no, we're not going to say, okay, first guy in the box, you get every sewer unit and everybody else is left behind. That's something we need to balance out internally. Before this is released, this is, we would allocate out based on the size of the parcel, the number of units on it, everything else that work with that. If they want to exceed that, they're going to have to look at other options, either going further, reducing flows or anything else with that.
Well, one of the things that's worth noting is that, I'm talking about just 250, for example. It's a fairly good size area. We don't have a definitive border of exactly where that edge is, but it's highly unlikely that one developer is going to come in and develop that entire district all at one time. So you're going to have several different developers coming in, and as that occurs, the town is going to have to sit down, and we address these issues within the ordinance. What we're trying to say is there's an overall goal that we're trying to accomplish in this entire district. Now, how developers are coming forward, the town is going to have to look at each development proposal and then raised the broader question of, well, what are we trying to do here? So what each developer does might be a little bit different. The uses might be a little different. The scale might be a little different. But it needs to all be done. Steve said, in a couple of projects he talked about, it's got to look like, it's not this piecemeal thing. It's all part of a broad vision, and the sewer issues is part of that.
But as being a landowner there, and maybe I don't want to do any development right now, but in the future, what assurances do these other landowners have that some of this infrastructure is going to be held in reserve for them, where their property is not a worthless piece of property that's within a zone that can't be used because it can't be sewered, because it's already been consumed elsewhere?
No, great question.
I think I might be able to address that. The bottom line is, we don't know yet. Part of this process is to gather information and to listen to comments like the ones that you've raised tonight. And we really appreciate the input that all of you, just by being here tonight, has helped us with this process. We need to hear this kind of concerns, questions, comments. So please keep them coming. But to answer your question, we don't have an answer yet, but we're working on it.
I mean, the design guideline in the ordinance is something that's going to have a duration for years or decades. And circumstances, infrastructure, technology, all of these things will change. And it's very important that our ordinance, the outcome of the work that we produce on your behalf is adaptable and doesn't lock anybody into anything as it relates to the ability of this to be implemented over the course of time. So we haven't used existing infrastructure limitations as a governor right now for our work, recognizing that today we know what that looks like. Today we know there's an issue. We know there's a limitation. In 75 years, there will be other issues and other limitations and other technologies, and the way we live will change. And hopefully this ordinance is still serving you all well. But I think it's an important issue to bring up, because it's something that we've talked about with staff every time we've met.
I think, as we said at the beginning, this is the beginning of the process. Tonight is an information gathering from the neighbors. We don't have all the answers, as Katie said tonight. I mean, we're not trying to come into this is how we're going to do it.
But I think it's something that needs to be.
And that's great comment. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for, you guys live there. You guys know the area. You know the limitations. You know what the traffic issues are. You know what the stormwater issues are. You know what the sewer issues are. That's the information we're looking for from you as a resident. Tell us, what are your concerns? What are your needs? What are the problems out there? What would you like to see? What wouldn't you like to see? That's the stuff we're going to feed back to them. So we're at the beginning of the process. We've had some preliminary stuff. The consultants have shown a lot of what ifs. Here's what they've done in other places. None of those are going to work for Penfield. I mean, none of those are the answer for us. We need to know. Exactly. So this is what we're looking for tonight from the audience here, the audience at home, is send in your concerns, send in your, what would you like to see? What wouldn't you like to see? How would it work best? How wouldn't it work best? Sewer capacity issue is going to be a large part of the 250 corridor. I mean, that's going to be a major issue that we need to deal with.
Well,
so, I mean, those are great comments. Thank you.
If I could make just a quick comment. You remember right up front, there were a number of questions, and I said we walked through those, one by one, and those are kind of general questions. I think what I hear you saying is one of those questions on there needs to be, does it have a negative impact upon the potential use of adjacent landowners?
Well, exactly.
So it's a good point. We don't have a direct answer, but as long as that question is there and we continuously ask it each step of the way, I think that will help.
I guess I'm asking the question more of, I've seen something like this unfold before, where the first player in gets everything, and he's done, he's gone, he made his money, and everybody else ends up holding their hand.
We've seen that too.
I think it is a consideration that needs to be looked at, addressed, and some assurances made that it's going to be doled out equally to the landowners. Whether the development is happening next year or 10 years from now.
It's very fair points, and I'm glad you brought that issue up.
Or 75.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I work here. There's a lot of pictures of a lot of these mixed-use facilities that you've designed, developed, and maybe have been successful. How many have been successful in, say, the northeast quadrant of the United States, outside a city of 250,000, maybe a struggling city, in a second-level suburb with primarily residential and rural? Do you have, I didn't see too many examples. I saw a lot near larger cities or part of larger cities.
You know, it's interesting, you don't, and Steve and I've talked about it before, you can find a lot of examples of, it's interesting, I think if you had a U.S. map, you could start to map where mixed-use developments are occurring, and it's shifting. Most of the first ones that occurred really happened in the South. You know, North Carolina, Virginia, you know, Florida, other places. In part because there are a couple of reasons. There's a demand from the constituency of doing it. The ordinances and laws made it easy for that to occur. And you had developers who were looking for some way to do something a little bit different. You didn't see a whole lot in the Northeast. You're now starting, so it's kind of shifted. You saw a lot, you've seen a lot in Colorado, you've seen them in California, you see a lot in Oregon and Washington. And the central part of the U.S., you haven't seen quite as many. We're working with a client in Kansas City right now. That's a big push in that part of the country right now. There are some examples within the Northeast. Connecticut is doing some, you know, in Vermont they're doing some. Even in other parts of New York, those kinds of developments are occurring. I think the important thing is, as we said, we can point to more of them that don't work than we can that do work. And it's predominantly because they didn't stop and ask the questions that we're asking here of, what is it that's unique about this place that's going to make it work? So I think the fact that just because there hasn't been one here yet, like I said, the 3rd Street cottage ones, those were the first cottage, that's the first cottage development built in Washington. When that was built, there were people who said, wow, that's kind of goofy. They're too small and it's too close together, and who would want that? And whoever bought those first made a fortune and did something else. So it's more a question, I think, a lot of times of how it's done. There is, I will say this, the Environmental Protection Agency, right now, they're doing a study on the economic benefits of mixed-use development, and they're doing it from a national level. I haven't seen when that comes out. When it does, we'll make sure to send it to Katie, because I think that's something we all want to see within what, does it make a difference in certain parts of the country? We think quality planning and quality design works no matter where it is, and we absolutely believe, every time we look at Manitou Lake, Steve and I both go, wow, wouldn't you love to design that? That is such a unique site. If you do that the right way, that's going to be hugely successful. Our concern, just like yours, is what if it's not done well?
I think you've asked a really important question, though, and the way I would respond is, I'm thinking through your question. The question isn't what in our collective resume is grounded in this region. I think the question is, development pressure exists on the 250 corridor today. It exists today, and it will only amplify in the future. I think what the town has done, the planning staff and the town leadership has done, is said, and we've heard it from the steering committee, gosh, guys, we really need to diversify our tax base. We need to amplify and not rely on residential tax base. We need to provide residential options that the young people, when they grow up here, don't go to other communities. We offer them a place that they want to live here. When the community gets older, that we provide options for them to live that are here in the town of Penfield, and that when this development pressure occurs, we take an intentional approach to what that looks like that yields the absolute maximum value back to the residents of the town of Penfield. And so what we're doing, what we can bring to that equation is a couple of decades of experience, lessons learned, or maybe a couple of decades of experience of what not to do in some cases. But we can bring to you some examples and experience of how that works and how it can work best. And in working so closely with the steering committee, with the town leadership, with the planning staff, we're immersing, absolutely investing the time here in the town of Penfield to understand what makes this community great. We understand that 250 is kind of on the edge of this agricultural area, which is very important. So.
Very good answer. The question, however, was how many that can you point to that have been successful in a small inner city with a primarily residential, rural, second-level suburb in the Northeast?
And I think we've seen, we'll have to double check. I mean, we've sent some other than what we've shown you here, we've sent some other examples to the town that we thought were good examples that you needed to look at. And they're not all, a lot of these projects, I mean, like I said, we tried, there are a number of projects in Ohio and Connecticut and places that you just wouldn't typically think of as kind of the hotbeds of design and planning. And they're working very well, I think, because they've paid attention to that. So I'm not sure we can point to those off the top of our head, other than I think it's a really good question. These sites are unique. The solutions have to be unique. You know, we can show you 100 other examples that worked, and none of them necessarily fit this.
I think we're more fearful of the examples that we know don't work, which is going back to the last 50 or 70 years of auto-centric sea of parking in front of strip commercial that ultimately yields nothing to anybody. In 5 years, they're old and tired, and the next iteration of that develops somewhere. That's what we're more concerned about, that outcome on behalf of the town, then we can point to 5 other projects in this region that are archetypes for what we're talking about here.
See, let me give you 2 quick examples. You know, what Steve said, one of the real big pushes we see in design and planning now is redoing strip malls. You know, strip malls from 20 years ago just fundamentally aren't working anymore. You're not seeing a whole lot of new ones of those. You know, we'll probably still see some beta tapes out there, you know, I don't know, VCRs and stuff. But, you know, just because things are still being done at times doesn't mean that they should be. But as a general rule, strip malls, we're seeing a lot of questions, a lot of discussions about how do we redo those and rethink those. Where I live in Smyrna Market Village, what's interesting is the infrastructure of it is good. The circulation is good, the way the spaces are defined, the connectivity, all of that works really well. But you remember I mentioned a number of the shops? There were a number of shops that failed. And first, when I first moved there, they were all these tiny little novelty shops, and I kept saying, how can you have so many novelty shops? I mean, how many painted rocks can you buy? I mean, so you found that most of those went away, and some of the stores sat empty for a while, and now they've come back. One of them is a lawyer's office. The local TV station rented one of the spaces on the corner. My favorite shop is the wine shop on the corner. We do our best to support them, but the uses have changed. The shops have changed as the market has changed, but the basic infrastructure, the basic, you know, framework of what makes the Smyrna Market Village work didn't change, and I think that's what allows it to be successful. So I think partly what we're trying to do is figure out what is that infrastructure that's going to work for you and provides the flexibility for those individual uses to shift and change as the market comes into play. I have to admit, if I'm at 250, I want to do as close as you are to the YMCA. I want to do some kind of healthy food with really good healthy ice cream, of course. But, you know, but there's certain types of uses that to me kind of make sense, but that's not really what I do. So if we can help work with a developer to put that infrastructure in place, then the entrepreneurs out there who want to do little shops, they'll find the right spots. You know, they'll figure out the spot and the menu and the prices that's going to work. And I think it's that kind of synergy and mixture that we're looking for. Sir.
I don't live in the town. I'm, I guess what you'd call one of the developers or investors. And I'm just trying to educate myself a little bit because I kind of came in on the tail end. I recently looked at a piece of property. And I don't know, I'm glad that I came to this meeting, but I'm not maybe seeing the roads, I don't know. I've seen a lot of pushback on this mixed use.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm reading it wrong. I mean, have you guys had any kind of survey or study from the residents here to see whether or not they, in fact, even want this?
Is that a Katie question?
That one? Is this on? I'd love to. Back in 2008, we initiated a comprehensive plan update. It's the town's 5th comprehensive plan, which we adopted on February 2nd, 2011. Through the course of those 2.5 years, we had ample opportunity for public participation. The major components of that project, that plan, there's 3 things. There's the community profile, which includes the town demographics, employment, medium drive time, et cetera, et cetera. The second component are the goals and objectives of the town for the next 10 to 15 years. And along with that, our implementation measures of how to implement these goals and objectives. The third portion of that project was a future land use map, and there's actually a image of that hanging up on the wall back there. Those identified mixed-use districts where we aired out before the town, the population as a whole. We had a 21-member steering committee, multiple public meetings. All of our committee meetings were open. Actually, all of the steering committees for this project are also open to the public. We more than welcome you to come and listen to the deliberation by the committee members. But I guess my point is that we aired this out, we threw it up the flagpole, we listened to comments, and the town board took all that into account and adopted this document. So it wasn't as though we were sitting around upstairs and said, hey, let's do mixed use. That sounds like an exciting project. It wasn't that at all. We had a bunch of very intentional projects that led us up to this point. Prior to the comprehensive plan, Mark mentioned during his introduction, we did the 250 corridor study, analysis of Village of Webster all the way down to Victor. We know accident data, we know access management, we know all kinds of things. That led to, you know what, we're the least developed, we should do a land use analysis. We need to really study this area. Many of you sitting in the audience have called me and called our town supervisor and said, Katie, you have studied this. Enough studying, do something, move on it. That's what this is. We're implementing. So we're taking the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan that we listened, that were generated through a public process, and we're implementing them. Did I answer your question?
I can tell you, I wish more of the jurisdictions that we work in had the kind, and I'm not saying this because I'm standing in the town hall.
Instead of hearing you tell us what you're doing, we've got multiple questions out here, and you're continuing to give us 20-minute answers to a 5-minute question. We're here to discuss. I think this is discussion time. I've tried to raise the question 3 or 4 times and been told somebody else is busy. You're giving us very long answers with very little detail, and now all of a sudden it's 9 o'clock. Well, are we going home with all our questions answered? Okay. I don't think so. Jim, I asked you earlier about, let's talk about taxes. You said we'll do it later. Now.
Oh, good point.
The town spends $20 million a year on town services. The school spends $80 million providing services to our students.
Yes.
So when you talk about all your benefits to give us because of this mixed use and how you're reducing the burden on the town, help us with the burden on the students.
No, good point.
You're bringing down the price of the houses, you're bringing down the square footage, and then you're saying, oh, by the way, a couple kids might stop at the bus stop to go to school. where's the break-even point for us to have the taxes cover the cost of schools? I don't think it's 50 or 75 or $100,000 houses. It's in the $300,000 range.
Well, it's a good point, and thank you for bringing it back up. I should have.
Also clustered.
Pardon?
Also clustered.
Also
together.
clustered with, 30 houses on a property, you might have 3 or 4.
What research has shown in general, that when you have a single-family home on a half-acre lot, those are fundamentally intended, they were originally intended for families. Those are families that had school children. By and large, well, let me just say this point blank. Research has clearly shown that mixed-use developments have far fewer school-age children in it for 3 reasons. One is they're a lot of times geared toward very young families, and the kids are not in school. Where I live,
Talk Penfield, not where you live.
okay,
Talk
good
Penfield.
point. But most mixed-use developments, a lot of them are very popular for young adults, young professionals, which I think we've heard a lot where, in the discussions we've had, where the young professionals have said, we don't want to live in the same subdivisions in the houses where our parents do. We want something different.
But you've shown us developments that have, in 1 or 2 approved building lots of that size, have 10 or 12 housing units being built.
Yes.
And you're saying, yes, there's going to be people that are early, young families that don't have kids, and there's going to be elderly families that don't have kids around, but there are still going to be kids in that development.
There are. What you have to do is you have to compare the number of kids in a mixed-use development versus the number of kids in a traditional development on the same lot.
Yep.
Those are the 2 comparisons.
I understand.
The research, and I'll make sure I send it to Katie. Research has shown that mixed-use development has typically about 70, I'm sorry, I'm going to say it backwards. It has about 25 to 30% less children than a traditional place, in part because, and I know you don't want to hear this, but where I live, it's not a good place for children. There are no yards, there are no playgrounds.
Just like Penfield really wants, to have a non-child-friendly environment, an environment where indeed the housing is older folks and younger adults that can't find jobs. But
I would say in Penfield, you've got a lot of, I mean, if somebody wants to live in a single-family, house on a half-acre lot, you've got a lot of options for that. You don't have a lot of options for the other one. So the question is, what is the balance? And I think the thing to do is, as you're moving toward mixed use, we're certainly not saying take most of Penfield and develop it in mixed use. Trust us, it's going to work. But mixed use, as we said earlier in the districts, it's a development by development thing. And what developers are going to find out pretty quickly is if I'm doing a mixed use, if I have a 15-acre mixed use development, and I do, if it's like in Washington, if it fills up quickly, I'm going to go, wow, that's pretty cool. I'm going to do another one. If it doesn't fill up, then you're not going to see many of those. So to me, a big question is, you need to make sure that the first mixed-use developments are done well, they're done very high quality, that they have every chance of success. Now, if they succeed, it's because you have people either in Penfield or adjacent areas that are looking for that kind of use and that kind of diversity. And I would say this, if you can provide diversity, you can raise the amount of taxes you generate without increasing the demand that you have upon schools. That's something that's worth talking about.
In this area, though, if I understand it right, these are supposed to be 2-acre lots. There's a few that are not. I think that's still true.
Well,
You're comparing a 2-acre lot with a cluster of 10, 15 houses on the same amount of places. There's going to be more kids there than there is on a 2-acre lot.
Well, there's a number of factors you consider. You consider the size of the house, you consider the size of the lot. We're balancing on one side the amount of tax revenue generated.
Whether school taxes now, not town taxes. School taxes.
But if I'm sitting here and I'm looking at the financial sustainability of Penfield, there are a number of issues I've got to look at. I've got to look at how much money we're generating at the same time, I look at how much money we're spending on schools. And, if the amount of money we spend on schools is going up, but the amount of money we're generating is going up even more, maybe that works out pretty well. The problem you have is when the amount of taxes you generate aren't going up and your school costs are going up. That's what we're seeing all over the country, and that's one of the problems. And frankly, whether it's a half-acre lot or a 2-acre residential lot, that's never going to balance. It's just not.
The amount of children are going to raise the school taxes. So you're going to have more children in a clustered area than you are in a 2-acre lot.
Well, I think it's a comparison. The John Marvel in Missouri, it's predominantly all older adults. There are no children there. So it's not just that all residential development is the same. It's the type of residential, it's the type of person that it's going to generate. Sure, if I have 500 homes here versus 200 homes here, in theory, 500 homes have a lot more children. But if they're 500 homes, if they are 800 square foot small studio spaces, you're not going to have kids there because the space doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. You obviously disagree with that.
I do disagree. I don't think you're building 800 square foot homes. I don't believe you're proposing that. And I'm believing that if I'm a young family in Penfield searching for a $300,000 house, I can find one.
Sure.
But if I'm searching for maybe a $150,000 or $200,000 house, it's very challenging to do that in Penfield. And some of the cluster developments are trying to keep their land costs down by putting more houses on the land that they have available. And as a result, the number of kids in those houses go up. The number of kids in our schools go up, and the number of taxes to our schools go up.
A lot of the mixed-use developments, there are exceptions. A lot of the mixed-use developments that we showed you, they're not low cost. They're very high quality. They're very high material. So if you're talking about a family of 5 looking for low-income, affordable housing, that's not typically the type of housing. Now, perhaps that's another type of housing that we can have a discussion to provide.
But your mixed-use model depends on the fact that a significant portion of the mixed use is businesses generating higher tax revenues. That's what you told us before. The higher tax revenues come from the business portion, not from the residential portion.
As a general rule, yes.
As a general rule, okay.
Yes.
So you're envisioning houses that have maybe the developments that are 75% housing, 25% commercial, or you won't give us numbers, you're giving us generalities, that's fine, it's early in the process. But if we're working in those kind of numbers, what kind of businesses are you talking about? You're talking about restaurants, lawyers?
Well, let me just do this. Okay. I'll use your numbers. 25% is going to be businesses, right? As we said earlier, we want to focus, and I'm going to expand it just a little bit, businesses and offices. We want those to be local services, the types of things, the local market that you go to, the dry cleaner, whatever local services that you typically would do on a day-to-day. The point of it is we're not doing like strip malls, we're encouraging people to come in. That exacerbates the problem. So that's the kind of 25%. Now, of the 75%, the question then becomes, how much of it is for the single family, how much of it is for single professionals, how much of it is for older adults, those two don't have children, how much of it is going to be for young families that have children. Now, the last category is what you're talking about. Now, whether we find a break-even point depends on what that percentage is. One of the things that we've got to do in discussions with the town is look at more closely, well, what do we think that balance is? And I will say this, there are certain, it's not always a clear black and white break-even because some communities will simply say that is a service that we're paying more of it than we get back, but it's a service that we agreed to provide. Some communities agree to that, some communities don't. I think it's up to Penfield to decide kind of what that balance is.
You're excluding the Walmarts of the world from this kind of discussion? Because you showed a slide with the Walmart contribution to the tax base at $2,200, if I remember correctly, to show how poorly of a contributor that was to the community. I guess Walmarts don't count in that kind of discussion then? You don't want big boxes in it, you want little guys, mom and pops, restaurants and wine shops and ice cream shops that generate huge amounts of cash that we end up taxing and getting revenue from?
I'll just say this, as a general rule across the board, mixed uses typically don't include big box. They don't include, as I said earlier, drive-in oriented, they don't include automobile oriented uses. I can't say specifically what we're doing right now because our discussions, we'll talk with the staff and we'll talk with the steering committee and get their feedback on what they think are appropriate uses. But in general, yeah, I mean, I think in general, research has clearly shown big box businesses, they don't generate the amount of tax revenue that people expect. Give you another example. You used to see a lot of communities investing money into professional sports teams or big stadiums and things like that. They found out it doesn't generate money. It might help with community pride and community identity, but you pay for it. You're spending more money to do that than you're getting back in revenue. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. We've got one of the most expensive stadiums in the world, in the country, that we can't afford. We lose money on it.
We don't have those in Penfield. We do a big box.
We're proposing one of those, though. So.
There's employers in the area that are pretty good-sized employers.
Sure.
We spend our money locally, things like that. What you're saying is, as your example, your Walmart example, how poorly it contributes to the tax base at $20-some $100, where's the consistency in your presentations? You want them, you don't want them, you want residential, you want commercial, you want the tax money to flow, and man, your bar charts are great to say this, 4-story high, great density development had a tremendous tax flow. I hope you could do those.
The example that we showed you was from Raleigh, North Carolina, and those were the uses that they use.
Yeah.
As I said, in general, we don't support big box development as part of mixed use, because if you look at all of the basic principles that we said, that it doesn't fit, doesn't really support any of those.
The Albertsons example doesn't count. That's not a big box store in your thinking. And we had a Rite Aid, whatever. What kind of commercials are going to generate the tax revenue to support your slides? I don't see it. A wine tasting store, an ice cream shop.
No, it's a mix. In our experience, it's a mix of smaller anchors, and it's a mix of local, regional, sometimes national anchors, and with complementary smaller shops. The difference being that the uses within mixed use have synergy with one another. So that eliminates or reduces the amount of infrastructure that's required to support it. If you look at what's required to support, using a Walmart as an example, the amount of trips per day and the traffic and infrastructure kinds of improvements that are necessary to support it as compared with the revenue that it brings is a lot lower than a highly integrated, more dense mixed-use kind of development. And that's really what the bar chart shows.
But let's talk Manitou and Tops that are synergistically related. I could see a golf cart coming out of that area, going over to do my shopping, go back, a electric vehicle that I don't have to go far on, and I could see playing those things up. But I'm not hearing it. I'm hearing, well, we build with commercial on the ground floor, and we residential on the top, and you're not going to get a 100,000 square foot supermarket into that kind of place. You might get an Aldi's or something like that.
You're talking about
20,000 or 30,000.
Yeah.
So I make sense, and I see in the Manitou connecting with that Panorama Plaza, restaurants, and make it friendly for electric vehicles, low speed type of things. It makes sense for people that they don't have to have their Cadillacs and Ram pickup trucks, and they do, a two-seater to get over to go to restaurants and maybe hit Bill Gray's for an ice cream. I think it's a perfect area there, but it's taking your expansion from just what we're building to what we're adding to already in that area.
Right.
And making it worth it.
No question.
Because, again, from a 25 or 35 mile an hour driving speed, you can reach all those places in an area that the housing would build that synergy you're looking for. And the strip mall isn't dead, it's still around, but we still have that opportunity to come in there. But, you know, in Manitou, you're not going to put an awful lot of commercial in there, the developers won't see that because there's just not the land there.
Manitou is a really unique destination. Manitou is unlike any mixed-use commercial district anywhere. It's special. It's unique to its location. And you're right. There's some assets that are there. Panorama Plaza across the street could use a good synergistic neighbor. And Manitou has the opportunity. That mixed-use district has the opportunity to do that. But it's not going to be any prototype of anything we've shown. It's very special and very unique. The Manitou Steering Committee has been probably one of the most interesting that we've.
What I'm just saying is you're saying these boundaries you're putting around the Manitou property is excluding currently all the mixed use that already exists in there, and you're not looking to connect them in.
Not necessarily. No, I would say that we've had discussions about all of the adjacent land uses.
I didn't hear them tonight.
Yeah, we've talked, and we talked a lot about examples, and we probably didn't talk enough about the specifics of each one of these districts. We've talked a lot about recreation at Manitou and what's synergistic with recreation. What private development is synergistic? Panorama Plaza is a great asset that is existing that could use a good neighbor. Ellison Park is a magnificent asset in this community that has an opportunity for recreation to be synergistic. The trail connections and open space connections are exceptional. So we have talked about all of those things, and your point is exactly right. These districts aren't autonomous entities unto themselves by any stretch, and there are existing uses even within those districts, and as the districts are pliable, we can connect them, we can connect what happens within these districts. We have to set up a framework that connects what happens within these districts to what's existing around it.
I would say right now, and I'll let Katie comment on this, your existing zoning precludes most of the examples that we've shown you tonight. Your example, your existing zoning, it's a one-use zoning. So there's not the opportunity to talk about, do we mix it this way or do we mix it that way or how do we set it up? The whole purpose of a mixed-use district is to provide flexibility and options. Now, I will say this, there's probably, I'm going to grossly oversimplify it, 2 steps on this. One is you've got to implement a mixed-use district, because once you do that, it now lets you have a whole different level of discussions about what can occur there. The kind of discussions that we're talking about right now, we can't give you specific answers, because I would say this, if one of our developers in the audience was up here and proposing a specific design solution, then we're going to get into a lot of discussions of the details of how big is that parking and how far is it from here to there and how do we handle storage and how do I get across the road. So there's a whole nother set of questions that we have to ask. The purpose of a mixed-use ordinance is frankly to allow you to ask them and then to come up with creative solutions that works best not only for Penfield but for each individual district.
Well, seeing that it's 9:15, I just wanted to mention that one of the comments that came up was referencing the number of children in Penfield. I've remissed. We should post documentation for our region for population projections. We need to bring that data into the discussion, and then partly, it shows that this process is working. You brought that point to us. Okay, we're on it. We'll start working on that.
Those statistics from the school district, they do a good job publishing those. And again, when you start talking about mixed-use development, higher densities, you're talking about those taxes going up. There's no way to deny that.
So we need to get those population projections widely available to the people who are interested in this project. I don't want to say just residents and just business owners, whomever is interested in following this process. So with that being said, I think it's time for us to wrap up here. But this is not the only opportunity for you to bring comments like you have this evening to our attention. If we haven't gotten to your question yet, I sincerely apologize, but I would ask you to send it to us. We ask that you submit it in writing and give us an opportunity to collect data and respond to it. The most easy way for that to happen is to email planning@penfield.org. You're welcome to give any of the planning department staff a call. We'd be happy to sit down and meet with you. We need to hear these kinds of questions. So on that topic of providing data to back up the decisions that have been made to date, decisions I'm referring to is that we're doing this project. This is a really great thing. If you think of any other material that you would like access to, Jim has referenced a number of studies tonight, let us know. We will find them. We have a great resource. We can post as much information as you need that we can get our hands on the town website. We have the capabilities to link up to all sorts of resources. For those of you who prefer not to use the website, that's fine. Just give us a call, and we'll go looking for that data, and we'll go looking for those answers, and we'll follow up with that.
And I did want to say, Steve and I are available. I mean, if you want to talk to us, send Katie an email. She'll find us. Contact us directly. That's fine. We like these discussions. We think this is an important topic, and we put a lot of time and energy into it. And if we disagree on something, we absolutely don't mind having to back up and go look up something and see if it's right and see if it's not. So, we're available. This is we like working with the staff, and we like this project, and we like your changing weather, and look forward to continuing it.
Hold your breath, it'll change again.
Probably already has.
That's why many of us love living here. Okay, so I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I know we've kept you longer than we anticipated, but I, again, sincerely appreciate your input, your comments. We certainly have a few areas to go investigate. We look forward to the continued conversation. So, thank you.